Everyone. I'd like to welcome Dr. Anil Lamba and you all on behalf of our forum Hotshots. Dr. Lamba is a best-selling author, financial literacy activist, and an international corporate trainer. Dr. Anil Lamba is a practicing chartered accountant, holds degree in commerce, law, and doctorate in taxation. Dr. Lamba training programs are held internationally with client list exceeding 3,000 large-size and medium-sized corporates globally. He has conceptualized and is actively engaged in implementation of financially intelligent organization, a unique concept of certification awarded by LAMCON to Corporation for Management of Accounting Processes and Financial Acumen. Financial literacy for all, a movement towards creating a financial intelligent India. This is a social responsibility project with the aim of spreading financial literacy among billions of Indians. With over two decades of experience in training and consultancy in finance, Dr. Anil Lamba has created and developed two series of training videos, Figure Out the World of Figures and Anil Lamba on Finance, and has done pioneering work in distance education and e-learning. He's also written several books, over 1,500 articles. His books, Romancing with the Balance Sheet, Flirting with the Stocks, Eye on the Bottom Line, Financial Affairs of the Common Man, are currently making waves. So further delay, I'd like to invite Mr. Anil Lamba to come and share his sides.
Thank you so much. Pleasure being here. This is my second time with EO Indore. Maybe some of you were there the last time, maybe not. Maybe you've forgotten also. Good evening, everybody. How much time do I have? 90 minutes. Okay. You know, if I ask you a silly question, how do I describe this company? Can I say they are a leading automobile manufacturer? And how do we describe this company? Thank you. And what about this one? Is that right? Absolutely wrong. Folks, all these three names that I put over there are actually in the same business. And never to forget, the business of running a business enterprise is to make profit. Tell me, you know, a few years back, a study was conducted by the Reserve Bank of India of all the sick businesses in the country, businesses that had failed. And the idea was to find out, why do businesses fail? If we do some brainstorming amongst ourselves, why do businesses fail, folks? We are all aware that India started a globalization, liberalization program with effect from 1991 under Dr. Manmohan Singh and the then Prime Minister Narasimha Rao. Prior to 91, we were not that open as a country. Consequently, there was not enough competition. And therefore, several mediocre companies were also managing to flourish. A few examples would be maybe Hindustan Motors, maybe Pune, where I live, there's a company called Bajaj Auto. I think if somebody had bought a scooter from them, maybe in the 60s, or the mid 70s, or the late 80s, or even the early 90s, there's hardly any change. No innovation, no improvement. Where's the motivation? I'm told if someone wanted to buy a scooter from Bajaj, I think you had to pay a 33% booking advance. 33% booking advance for a capital goods item like a scooter. And father used to book and son used to get delivery. 6 years, 8 years, 10 years waiting period. Where's the motive? You are the Apple of scooters. 1991, government opened up its doors. Foreign players came in. These foreign players probably had the latest technology at their disposal. It is possible that in the post-91 era, some domestic players must have found that now, in comparison to the foreign competitor, our technology is out of date. And we don't have the money to buy new technology. It is possible that some players in the post-91 phase must have become technologically obsolete. Do you think technological obsolescence could have been responsible for a certain portion of sickness in industry? Possible? There could be a second category of entrepreneurs who, technology-wise, were as good as anybody else. The problem was not the ability to make. Their weakness was they knew how to make, but they didn't know how to sell. Do you think marketing inefficiency can lead to sickness? There could be a third category of entrepreneurs who knew how to make and who knew how to sell, but their misfortune was they had a very militant and unreasonable trade union, which went to probably for months of, let's say, strike. Production was shut down. Do you think labor problems can lead to sickness? Folks, Reserve Bank of India conducted a study of all the sick businesses in the country, and their study had found that out of all the sick businesses, over 95% were not sick due to any of these three reasons. Which means these three reasons and some more were responsible for not even 5% of business failures, and over 95% business failures were due to one reason, and that is financial mismanagement. Now, how does it happen? First of all, what does it mean? You know, I just gave you Indian statistics, but my statistics applies all over the world. It is an undisputed fact that in the world, across the world, out of every 10 businesses that shut down, more than 9 shut down because of bad finance management. And recent history has told us not only companies shut down, entire countries and economies shut down due to bad finance management. I think the entire subprime crisis of the United States can be attributed solely to bad finance management. Right now, as we speak, countries in Europe, Greece, Portugal, Spain, Italy are paying the price of bad finance management. South America, Venezuela. But what does it mean? What does it mean when I tell you 90 to 95% businesses fail due to bad finance management? I'll tell you what it means to me. You know, if someone came to me and said, Anil, my business shut down. Why? I became technologically obsolete. I don't understand how to blame that person. Suddenly this poor guy finds in front of him a giant has cropped up as a competitor from overseas. This giant is miles ahead in technology compared to him. In comparison, this poor guy's technology is out of date and he doesn't have money to buy new technology. How can you blame him? Or if someone comes to me and says, my business failed because of labor problems, sympathies go out to him. How do you blame him? But when somebody says, my business went sick, we shut down because of financial mismanagement, according to me, the entire blame lies on that person's shoulders. So how does it happen? Why does it happen? This happens because of a faulty description of who a finance person is. It's not that companies don't realize the importance. But tell me, if you realize your production department is weak, which department will you strengthen? The production department. If you realize your marketing is weak, which department will you strengthen? The marketing department. So if you realize your finance management is weak, what will you strengthen? Not the finance department, folks. Why? Because very, very little finance management happens in the finance department. The department that you call as finance is probably 80 to 90% engaged in accountancy. Then who's the one engaged in finance management? According to me, everybody maybe except the finance guys are the real finance people. If there is one person who can say I'm a non-finance person, it is the person who says I'm a finance person. Why? Because that person may be capable of doing finance management, but the person is not around when finance management is happening. I think every action of every individual in the organization is a financial action. Every purchase decision has a major financial implication. Every sales decision has a financial implication. Every HR decision has a financial implication. And these are the people who call themselves non-finance. And the finance person is not in the picture when these decisions or actions are being taken. They come into the picture later. They do a post-mortem and tell you whether your organization has made a profit or not. What I'm trying to tell you folks is the real finance people call themselves non-finance. And the people who call themselves finance people are not there when it is happening. Then who's doing finance management? It's one of the most neglected areas in every organization. And the price paid is this. I've always said there is no category of person called non-finance person. You see, let's take a simple example. Let's say there's a salesperson out in the field. Product is laptops. This salesperson bumps into a potential customer. Customer asks him, how much is your laptop for? For argument's sake, let us say 100,000 rupees. This customer says, you know, I am starting a new IT services company. I require 1,000 such pieces. But he says, my budget is not 100,000. I cannot go beyond, put any number, 80,000. The salesman is told, if you give me at 80,000, I will place an order for 1,000 pieces. Tell me, such offers must be coming the way of salespeople all the while? Standing in the field, this person is now expected to say yes or no to this offer? Tell me, the moment he says yes or no, has he taken a sales decision or has he taken a financial decision? He will call it a sales decision, but I'm saying this is finance management in action. You understand, if salesperson's organization could afford 80,000, this man has just now committed a crime against his company if he said no to the customer. And if his organization could not afford 80,000, he has probably committed a bigger crime against the company if he says yes. Now, where is any finance person in this deal? He's not even there when it's happening. And I can give you similar examples from virtually every function within the organization. And folks, the price paid for this lack of understanding who a finance person is. So even those companies who understand the importance of finance management will make sure the finance department is strong. But that doesn't help. Financial literacy has to go top to bottom across the organization. And mind you, this ignorance is globally. I train thousands of companies across the world and I find it's uniform. Doesn't matter where you are. Now, if finance management is so important, let's say one of you might get up and say, okay, Anil, I agree. Number one, finance management, very important. Number two, in my organization, good finance management can only happen when everybody says that within the organization, my finance management is good. Then your next logical question to me will be, so Anil, can you tell us what is good finance management so that we can start practicing from tomorrow? That's the reason probably why I'm here. Now, when somebody like you would ask me, can you tell us what is good finance management? My reaction used to be, I'm sorry, good finance management is not a two-line definition. It's a whole subject. It's a whole philosophy. It takes years to learn. And then I used to feel the unfairness of it all. What am I doing? I'm first communicating to you how important the subject is. I am perhaps creating in you a desire that I'm willing to take the efforts and the pain to learn so that I can make a difference. And when you say I'm willing and I'm ready, I say, I'm sorry, I have no answers for you. I used to wonder, can I give you a magic formula? You want to practice good finance management from tomorrow? Here is a magic formula. Do this and good finance management will happen. Obviously, there are no magic formulae. But what I have is something pretty close to that. I will now give you what, in my opinion, is good finance management, presented to you in the form of two rules. Let's call them the two golden rules of good finance management. My complete conviction is, you guys understand these two rules? Very easy to understand. My conviction is entire subject of finance management is common sense. It's not rocket science at all. These two rules are also common sense rules. Folks, you understand these two rules. You internalize these two rules. If you promise me never to violate these two rules, I will promise you most problems that others suffer from on account of bad finance management, you will not. I repeat, if you promise never to violate these two rules, I will promise a majority of problem that affects others. And please understand, a majority of problem that affects others is financial mismanagement related. You will not suffer from them. But folks, before I give you those two rules, I need to make sure we are all on the same page so far as the balance sheet is concerned. I'm sure all of you are already familiar, but right now let me address, even if there is one person in the room who's not that familiar, let me address that person. So bear with me, those of you who know more than others, till I try to create a level playing field so that I can take everybody along. Fair enough? Folks, a balance sheet, we know balances. Why does a balance sheet balance? No technical answers. I don't want debit credit wala answer. A balance sheet balances because what do liabilities represent, folks? Why is there a debt? Why do you owe that money to someone? Because you've taken. So liabilities tell you what you've taken. If I come to Amit and I say, Amit, give me 100,000 rupee loan, only then I will write over here, I owe Amit 100,000. That means I've taken that from him. Folks, liabilities represent sources of money. What are assets? Assets represent what you own, what you possess. And how did you get to own them? You must have spent this money and acquired those assets. So assets tell you what you did with the money. So if you go to all these people and together from them collect 100 rupees or 100 crores of rupees, and you spend that 100 crores and acquire 100 crores worth of assets, the balance sheet is bound to balance. If you spend less, you borrow 100 and spend 90, balance sheet still balances because the 10 that you haven't spent also appears over there as cash balance, bank balance. And if you have 100 and spend 110, then the 10 will be shown over here as payable and outstanding. So it can't be arithmetically possible for a balance sheet to not balance. Now, where do businesses raise money from? You know, when a business needs money, how many options does it have? One option, and that is to borrow. Who does a business borrow from? It borrows from the owner, and it borrows from outsiders. Borrowings from owners is called capital, borrowings from outsiders is called a loan. Let's say this company wants 1,000 crores. It goes to the owners, we need some money. Owners say we are not interested in giving you 1,000 crores, but we don't mind giving you 400 crores. So that will be called capital. For the remaining 600, they will go to some outsider and take a loan. What is the difference between the owner as the lender and the outsider as the lender? The difference is in the terms of lending. On what terms did the owner lend? On what term did the outsider lend? Folks, you will appreciate when somebody goes to borrow, no lender is ever going to lend you money without asking a series of due diligence kind of questions. What kind of questions will you ask? Questions designed to understand the need for money, the ability to intelligently deploy the money, the ability to generate revenue, the ability to service the loan, and the ability to repay the loan. So when this company went to these two lenders, both of them must have asked these questions. The answer received must have been, you know, folks, we are starting so-and-so company manufacturing so-and-so item, and therefore, first of all, we will take your money, and we will use it to buy some wonderful assets for ourselves. Then we will use your money to buy raw material. We'll use your money to hire people. And once a product is ready, we'll use your money to do sales and marketing. And when we've sold our product, we will make profit. And once we make profit, Mr. Owner, we will reward you. Mr. Lender, we will reward you also. And both these people must have said, we have no doubt at all. Once you earn, of course you will reward us. But our question is, our worry is, what if you don't earn? Then what happens? And if this business must have said, folks, if I earn, I will reward you. If I don't earn, how can I reward you? Listening to this kind of an answer, out of these two lenders, one of them will back out. One of them will chicken out. Obviously, who will chicken out? The outside lender. The outside lender will say, if my returns are going to depend upon whether you earn or you don't earn, then I'm sorry, I'm not interested in lending. I will lend you on one condition, guarantee me a return. And this organization must have said, banker, that's pretty unfair. If we don't earn, how can we guarantee you a return? But we all know there are times in life where beggars can't be choosers. You want the banker's money, you'll also have to agree to the banker's terms and conditions. So reluctantly, this company must have said, all right, Mr. Banker, you expect us to carry on giving you a reward even when we are making losses? We will agree to that because we have no choice. But then they must have said, Mr. Banker, even we have a couple of requests. Request number one, if you expect us to continue rewarding you even when we are making losses, then first of all, Mr. Banker, don't keep your expectations sky high. You know, you want a reasonable kind of a return. Perhaps we'll be able to afford it even when we are losing money. Banker must have said, I'm happy with, let's say, 10%. And this company must have said, banker, if you expect us to give you 10% even when we are making losses, we are agreeing to that. But then on the other hand, don't forget, we might make profit. And we may make a huge amount of profit also. Then you don't keep an eye on that. If we're going to give you 10% when we make losses, we will give you the same 10% when we make tons of profit. Banker must have said, fair enough. I'd rather have the assurance of a guaranteed return than have the possibility of a very high return in 1 year and nothing in another year. Point I'm trying to make is, on what terms do outsiders lend? Give us a guaranteed, but a limited amount of return. Owner is listening to this conversation between the company and the bank. Owner turns around and says, now, you know, I'm not like the banker. I'm not so unreasonable. I understand you will have ups and downs in your life. Some years you'll make profits, some years you won't make profits. Owner says, take my money, no need to make promises. Which means, if you don't earn, we are okay if we get nothing. But then the owner says, you understand we're taking a risk, we might get nothing. So to compensate for that risk, when you do earn, and after everybody's been paid off, then we will take everything. Outsiders lend on the condition, give us a guaranteed but a limited amount of return. Owners lend on the condition, don't want guarantees, but then don't want limits on how much we can earn either. So folks, this company takes 400 crores from the owners, 600 crores from outsiders, 1,000 crores get deployed, excellent assets are purchased, assets are put into use, and now this company starts generating revenue. Imagine on deployment of 1,000 crores, they have now generated a sales revenue of 3,000 crores. So far, nobody's been paid. I want all of you to visualize and tell me how many groups of claimants can you visualize standing in a line. We want a share of the 3,000 crores. How will the 3,000 get distributed? You haven't yet paid salaries to employees, you haven't paid rent to the landlord, you haven't paid vendors, you haven't paid taxes, you're in a hurry to pay taxes, hold on. You haven't paid the printer, the stationer, the telephone company, the water company, the travel agent, etc., but these are items, I want groups. So can I say all these items comprise one group called operating expenses? Number two in the line, not number two, I'm not putting in order. Shareholders will want returns. Bankers will want returns, and your favorite, Government of India will also want returns. Folks, whatever sales revenue any organization generates gets distributed into maximum 4 groups. But not in this order. Let us decide the order now. Whose claim will they entertain first? If by government, if you mean GST, I agree with you, but GST is clubbed with operating. Here I mean income tax. So first priority will be operating expenses. Imagine this company's operating expenses are 1600 crores. That leaves you with 1400. What is this 1400 called? No. For gross profit, split this 16 into two parts. When I minus the first part, it's gross profit. When I minus the second part, it is one step after gross profit, one step before net profit, something called operating profit. Or what kind of profit is this? This is that stage of profit where from sales, you have recovered the operating expenses, but you still haven't paid shareholder the dividend, you still haven't paid lender the interest, you still haven't paid Government of India income tax. So this is also called PBIT, profit, but before interest and before tax, or it is called EBIT, earnings before interest and tax, EBIT. Now three groups are left. Whose turn now? Now we pay the lenders. This company has borrowed 600 at 10%, so you pay 60. That leaves you with 1340. This will obviously be called from PBIT, I has been paid. That leaves you with PBT. Now two groups are left, government and shareholders. Now who do we pay? Now we pay the government. Let's imagine the income tax works out to 340. That gives you 1,000 crores. This is called profit after tax. Who does it belong to? To the owners. So now in the line, the owners are standing, saying we had said, if you don't earn, we will take nothing. But when you do earn and after everybody else has been paid off, we will take everything. So the owners will say, please give this 1,000 crores to us. But when this company wanted the owners' money, they had gone and made all kinds of rash promises to the owners that all the profit will be given to you and this and that. But now that it's time to actually give it to them, this company starts having a change of heart. They start negotiating with the owners. They tell the owners, you know, we said everything belongs to you, and of course it does belong to you. You are ultimately the owners of this company. But they say, Mr. Owner, how much did you give us? Just about 400 crores. You know, had you not given this money to us, had you instead put it in a bank, how much would you have earned in a savings account? 4-5%, in a fixed deposit, 6-7%, in bonds, etc., 10-11%, in risky ventures, 15, 18, 20%. They say we can give you 30%. Or we can go up to 40%. Maybe we can stretch up to 50%. But please don't take the entire 1,000 crores away. Why are they saying this? Are they trying to cheat the owners? Answer is no. Ultimately, the owner owns the company. Then why? Having promised to them, why are they not giving it? No company gives the entire profit to shareholders. My question is, why not? The owner's original condition of joining was that. So why don't companies give entire profit to shareholders, folks? They need money for working capital. They need money for reinvestment, for expansion, for growth. But all this they knew even before, right? Before promising. Shouldn't they have told the owners while taking the money, some profit we will keep for growth, some for expansion? Why were they told we'll give it to you? So folks, whenever I ask this question, I get similar answers. This company needs for future expansions, it needs for exigencies, it needs for something like a pandemic. Who knew it will happen? You need to keep some money to face these situations. And my reaction always is, you know, folks, I will accept all your answers, but as reason number 2 for not giving it to the owners. There is a more important reason, number 1, why the entire profit is not distributed amongst owners. Now, my fault, I haven't explained that. We jumped straight into this. But had I spent 5-6 hours with you before reaching this level, a very, very important point, which all of you know because you are all large business people. I think what an entrepreneur realizes very, very soon after setting up the business is that there is no connection whatsoever between the profit that a business makes and the bank balance that it has. Or maybe there is a connection. I think there's an inverse relationship. Higher the profit, lower the bank balance. And the first and the most practical reason why this profit is not being given to the owners is this company has got 1,000 crore profit, doesn't mean they've got 1,000 crore in the bank. And to give it as dividend, they require that much of bank balance. Folks, a company making a profit of 1,000 crores, which is accompanied by a bank balance of 1,000 crores, I think is impossible. But a company making a profit of 1,000 crores, which is accompanied by a bank balance of negative 600 crore, absolutely possible. And therefore, the first and the most important reason why this profit is not being distributed is, where is the money? This statement comes from the bottom of the heart of most entrepreneurs. Which statement? Where is the money? Accountants tell us so much turnover, so much profit. In the bank, we seem to have problem paying salary for this month. Assuming on the off chance this company did have 1,000 crore profit and 1,000 crore bank balance, they still would not have given it to the shareholders. Then your other arguments would have come into the picture. We need money for expansion, for growth, for this and that. Guys, for all reasons put together, the end result would be this company will convince the shareholders, folks, had you put your 400 crores anywhere else, you would have earned 5%, 10%, 20%. We can give you 30, 40, 50%. Don't take the entire 1,000 crores away. And who are the owners? They own the company. They understand if this is in the interest of the company not to give it to us, and we happen to own the company, then it is in our interest not to take it away. Owners say, no problem. You can't give us 1,000 crores. How much can you give us? 50%? Give us 50%. How much money did the owners invest in this company? How much is 50% of 400? 50% of 400, not 1,000. Let's say you give them 200 crores. How much is left now? Who does this 800 crores belong to? Who does it belong to? It doesn't belong to the company. It continues to belong to the owners. When the owners agreed to accept 200 crores out of a profit of 1,000, they have not waived their right over the remaining 800 crores. They simply said, you can't give us 1,000, doesn't matter. How much can you give us? 200? Give us 200, use our 800 crores. So till yesterday, how much money did this company owe the shareholders? 400. Today, how much money does this company owe the shareholders? The original 400 they still owe, and now they owe them another 800. So the profit earned by the company also gets shown as a liability because it belongs to the owners, and it appears in your balance sheet under a heading called reserves. Folks, what is this 1,200 together called? This is now called the shareholders' net worth. Imagine this is a public limited company. They raised 400 crores by way of a public issue. They probably issued 40 crore shares, each carrying a face value of 10. And then out of each year's profit, a certain amount of profit they used to distribute, a certain amount of profit they used to retain. After a few years, the retained profit has mounted to 800 crores. Today, the net worth of the shareholders of this company has become 1,200. 1,200 crore is the net worth of how many shares? 40 shares. 40 crore shares. What is the value of each share? 1,200 divided by 40. That's 30 rupees. What is the 30 rupees called? This is now called book value per share. I was trying to prove to you that the left-hand side represents sources. So folks, is this a source of money? Of course. Who gave it to you? Owners. Is this a source of money? Yes. Who gave it to you? Again, the owners. Is this a source of money? Yes. Who gave it to us? Some banker, some outsider. And organizations not only borrow money from outsiders, they also go to vendors, etc. And they say, can you give us goods and services and we'll pay you a month, 2 months, 3 months later? So that is a loan in kind. This is a loan in cash, this is a loan in kind, but it's a loan nevertheless. You will now appreciate the left-hand side of the balance sheet merely represents a collection of sources. But the most important question to be answered is, why is this organization raising money from everybody? They borrow from the owners, they borrow from outsiders, they borrow directly, they borrow indirectly. Do you think this is an arbitrary collection of money, or must it be as per a plan? Do you think this is a random collection of sources, or must it be as per a design? If this company wants to survive, it better be as per a design, but it is not funny how often it is not. Imagine this money has come without a specific plan in mind. Now what do you think will happen? Folks, if the money was raised without a specific plan in mind, then you can visualize one out of two things happening. When these owners start investing this money on behalf of the company, they will discover, because money has come without a plan, they will either discover that halfway through acquisition of assets, they run out of money, or they will discover they were able to buy all the assets that they wanted and there was money left over. Folks, if the money has come without a plan, you will either run short of money or you will have excess money. Tell me which is a happier state of affairs. Should an organization have less money than it needs, or should it have more money than it needs? Let's examine both. Let's say they raised less money than they needed. Let's say they wanted to start a hotel like this. Their intention was to build a 100-storied building. Because money came without a plan, when they started investing this money, by the time they reached the 60th floor, they ran out of money. How will they run the hotel? Guys, if you have less money than you need, you will get into trouble. If you have more money than you need, I think you'll get into bigger trouble. I'm now giving you a mantra of good finance management, and that mantra is, please remember, less is bad. More is worse. Today is not the time to elaborate on that, how more is worse. That needs another couple of hours of session. But folks, remember, this rule applies across life. If you're a manufacturing company, what kind of installed capacity should you have in your factory? Less than necessary or more than necessary? How much inventory should you hold in your warehouse? Less than necessary or more than necessary? How much manpower should you have? Less or more? How much blood pressure should we have in our body? Less or more? Less is... This rule applies across life, folks. And therefore, the name of the game is optimization. And folks, therefore, what I'm trying to tell you is, how much money to raise is a matter of art. If you land up raising less money than you need, you'll get into trouble. If you raise more money than you need, you'll get into bigger trouble. I don't know whether I'll be able to communicate today how more is worse. I might, I'm not sure. But keep this rule in mind. Now tell me, what will this company do with this money, folks? A sizable proportion, I will not elaborate too much on the balance sheet today, I want to move on to the two rules, but a sizable proportion will go towards acquisition of infrastructure, which appears in your balance sheet under a heading called fixed assets. Let a substantial portion of money go into the acquisition of infrastructure, but make sure you do not exhaust all the resources in the infrastructure alone. You've got to make sure, having created infrastructure, there is money left behind, because you will now require a continuous supply of something known as working capital. Now, why do you need working capital? If you're a manufacturing company, having bought land, building, plant, machinery, now when an order comes, let's say this company receives a 100 crore order, if lucky enough to get the order, they'll have to be far, far, far luckier for the customer to say, I've not only brought you an order of 100 crores, but my order comes with a check of 100 crores. That in all likelihood won't happen. But to execute the order of 100 crores, you will probably need to invest 60 crores in raw materials. So unless this company has the financial resources, not only to set up the infrastructure, but also to invest 60 crores in raw material, you can't run your business. And as a prudent business person, they will not only buy raw material after the order is received, they will probably buy and maintain an inventory of raw material in anticipation of orders, so that the day the order comes, the production can commence forthwith. So first component of working capital, to have the financial capability to buy and maintain inventory. Second requirement is, even if you get the 100 crore order, it might take you 3 months to execute, but round the corner is the first of the month. Salaries have to be paid, overheads have to be paid, rent has to be paid. So every business person has to maintain a certain amount of cash in hand, so that day-to-day expenses can continue to be met without dependence on inflow from operations. And the harsh reality in businesses, after spending a lot of money, after spending a lot of time, this company goes to the customer, your order is ready, consignment is ready, would you like to come, inspect, give me the go-ahead so I can send it to you? And the customer says, go right ahead and send it. And you say, what about my check? And the customer says, come 60 days later and collect your check. Not only you may not get advance, even on delivery you may not get paid, and therefore you need to invest money in your customers also. So 3 components of working capital, folks: inventory, liquid cash, debtors. I wanted all of us to be on the same page so far as this balance sheet is concerned, so that I can go through those 2 rules with you. Balance sheet tells you left-hand side where the money has come from, right-hand side where the money has gone. How many sources of money are there in any organization? 2. Owners, outsiders, both given 2 ways. Money in any organization, where does it go? Into 2 avenues. Partially towards creation of infrastructure, partially towards supply of working capital. Working capital has 3 components, right? Now let me come down to, I won't be able to explain both the rules to you. I'll be able to do justice to one, because I'll give you both the rules in 5 minutes, but then each deserves hour and a half of discussion. So I'll elaborate on one of them. So what are these 2 rules? 2 golden rules. The first rule says, folks, if the left-hand side of the balance sheet tells you where the money has come from, and the right-hand side tells you where the money has gone, the first rule says, you must always remember, never forget, that out of all these resources on the left-hand side, none are free. Money is not free. Sources come at a cost. You may say, okay, so what? Because if these sources come at a cost, but what did you do with this money? You went and deployed it here. What did you acquire out of this money? You have acquired some fantastic assets for yourselves. And what kind of assets are these? Hopefully, these are productive assets. So folks, if sources appearing on the left side of the balance sheet have a cost attached to them, then the utilization of money, as depicted on the right-hand side, have an ability to earn associated with them. And the first fundamental common sense rule of good finance management says, folks, you should never ever invest your money without ensuring that what you can earn through this deployment of resources is at least equal to, preferably greater than, the corresponding cost of sources. What does the rule say? Rule says, recognize that the left-hand side of your balance sheet has a cost. Right-hand side of your balance sheet possesses an ability to earn. Invest your money in any business, any project, only after ensuring what you can earn from the right-hand side is either equal to or greater than the corresponding cost of the left-hand side. On the one hand, folks, this is such an elementary rule that to understand this rule, you don't even need to be literate. I think even illiterates understand this. What do I mean by that? Catch an illiterate fellow. Tell him, वहाँ पर एक money lender बैठा है. Will you go to that money lender and let's say borrow 10,000 rupees? This illiterate man goes to the money lender, borrows 10,000. But the money lender says, I will charge you 15% interest. The moment this illiterate man walks out of the money lender's shop, you intercept him and tell him, now give this 10,000 to me and I will pay you 10%. What answer will you get? No. Even illiterate person understands this. Why is he saying no? Now this illiterate man won't use this language. But he's saying, I can't give it to you because what you offered me just now is violating the golden rule number 1. Golden rule number 1 said, first understand what money costs you, and when you deploy it, make sure you don't do it unless you can earn equal to or greater than the cost of capital. So on the one hand, I have told you this is a golden rule of good finance management. On the other hand, I am telling you, even illiterates understand this. Your reaction will be, Anil, if everybody already understands, why are you calling it a golden rule? Ladies and gentlemen, you will be amazed. You will be amazed what an illiterate person will not do. How many large corporations there are that are guilty of doing. What are they guilty of doing? They are guilty of investing their money into avenues where they are not even generating a return which is even equal to the cost of capital, and what is scary is they don't even know it. Maybe after my session we can have a little chat. Probably there are some of you sitting in this room right now. You might say, Anil, just now you told us illiterates understand this, then you are expecting us to believe large organizations, professionals working over there. Are you saying they don't understand? Allow me half an hour to 45 minutes to convince you. All I can tell you is, I've been talking about this for too many years, but all I can tell you is, recently I was reading an article. You know, if you've been following America's politics, particularly around Trump's election time, a name you would have read very often would be of Mitt Romney. Mitt Romney is a Republican politician, very intelligent person, very suave politician, very successful business person. He was almost appointed Secretary of State by Trump. He's also the person who was a presidential candidate in 2012 when Barack Obama stood for re-elections. Amongst other things, Mitt Romney owns a group of companies by the name of Bain. Bain's presence is there in Bangalore also, I think Delhi also. Bain Software, Bain Research. I was reading an article by Bain that Bain and Company Research has found that in the US, 9 out of 10 businesses routinely fail to earn even the cost of capital. 9 out of 10. What does it mean? It means where this illiterate fellow said no, in the US, 9 out of 10 would have said yes. And if that's the case in US, you can imagine what must be the case over here. How it happens, I'll try and illustrate soon. First golden rule says, understand what money costs you, and then when you get an opportunity to deploy it, don't accept that opportunity unless you can earn a return which is equal to or greater. I need to elaborate. Why do I keep repeating equal to? Should I not be saying assets should earn greater than the cost? I intentionally do that. Soon I'll tell you why. You should earn equal to or greater than the cost of capital. You went to this illiterate fellow, you said, give me that 10,000, I will pay 10%. What answer did you get? No. Why not? He said, I'm paying 15. How can I give it to you at 10? Let's say you tell him, all right, you're paying 15, we understand. We'll be happy to give you 20%. Can this guy give it to you now? Is this investment opportunity satisfying rule 1? Yes. But he may still not give it to you. Why will he not give it to you? He may not give it to you if this investment opportunity, which is satisfying rule 1, is maybe not satisfying rule 2, which I haven't told you yet. In fact, rule 2, I want you guys to draft it yourselves. I'm going to give you the situation, you tell me the rule. Folks, when this illiterate man went to the money lender, I want to borrow 10,000. Money lender said, all right, but I will charge you 15% interest. And the money lender said, Mr. Borrower, one more condition. Make sure you return this money to me within a month. You went to him, you said, I'll give you 20%. And I will return the money after 2 months. Can he give it to you? This investment opportunity satisfies rule 1, but fails to satisfy rule 2, and therefore still should not be taken up. Can you help me put rule 2 into words? Rule 2 says, also don't forget. First of all, I tell you not to forget, money is not free. Rule 2 says, also don't forget, none of these sources are gifts. Under what heading do we show them? What does it mean? It means every person who has given you the money today is the same person who will be standing outside your door sometime or the other saying, I want it back. But what did you do with this money? You went and deployed it here. But these guys will expect it back. How will you give it back? And therefore, rule number 2 says, invest your money in such a way that the assets will bring it back before the liabilities ask for it back. The first rule says investment in assets must generate a return which is at least equal to the cost of capital. The second rule says assets must bring a cash inflow before the liabilities demand an outflow. These are not standard rules, these are my rules, but bring me any sick company's balance sheet and I'll tell you which of the two rules was violated. Or had they not violated the two rules, they would not be sick. So I will try and do justice now. Which one would you like to hear, first one or second one? Second? I'm okay with that, but I think the first one is more important according to me. Choice is yours. I don't know why I gave you the choice. I could have just continued. Since you don't know what's coming, so you wouldn't be the right place to... Both are actually equally important. Let me talk about this because this is the huge gray area. Can somebody tell me once again in your own words what is rule number 1? Are you all usually this silent or aaj khas kuch? Invest only after making sure it earns for you a return which is either equal to or greater than the cost of capital. So tell me, if you want to make sure you don't violate rule number 1, what is the prerequisite? You should know your cost of capital. If your business has to generate a return which is equal to or greater than cost of capital, then the prerequisite is knowledge about cost of capital. So can I assume every person sitting in this room right now is aware of their business's cost of capital? How many of you know your cost of capital? Okay. Usual percentage? My experience is if I'm addressing a room full of 100 entrepreneurs, when I ask this question, how many of you know your cost of capital? For the first 15 to 30 seconds, nothing happens. Then reluctantly, 1, 2 or 3 hands, exactly 3 hands went up here also. 97% of the people are saying, I don't know what you're talking about. But each of this person is a person who constantly takes decision about investing the money. According to me, you can't ever take that decision without knowing your cost of capital. Now guys, do you mind those hands which went up? Share with me what's your cost of capital in percentage. I don't want the amount. 7.25. 12% something. 12. Okay, remember your answers. We'll have another chat once I'm done. Soon after my session, you will know. First requirement is knowledge about cost of capital. Homework for tonight. I have a feeling tonight you might return very late. So homework for tomorrow. Work out your cost of capital. To understand the concept of cost of capital, I want you to imagine each of you individually is the owner of this company whose balance sheet is in front of you. Imagine this is your balance sheet. And now I ask you, how much is your cost of capital? All the data that you want is there in front of you. How much is the cost of capital if this happens to be your balance sheet? Okay, before you tell me cost of capital, tell me how much is the capital of this company whose cost we are trying to figure out. Unless you know capital, you can't work out cost of capital. How much is the capital of this company, folks? 300. 500. 1,000. Thank you. My usual experience is in the next few seconds, I get to hear every combination on the left-hand side. 300, 500, 700, 900, 1,000. एक आध मिस हो गया आप लोगों से, बाकी सब आ गए. Folks, for the limited purpose of this discussion, you will have to interpret the word capital to mean 1,000. Tell me, what is the logic of rule number 1? Logic. नहीं, वो नहीं बोला मैंने अभी तक. हाँ, बोला था. But the logic of rule number 1 is, guys, left-hand side of the balance sheet has a cost. And right-hand side of the balance sheet has an obligation to earn at least equal to the cost or more. What is the total of the left-hand side? 1,000. I need to understand what this 1,000 costs me so that I can make sure that 1,000 earns for me at least that much. But folks, the 1,000 on the left has got 4 components. What is component number 1? Whose money? Owner's money. What's component number 2? Whose money? Again, owner's money. Component number 3? Some banker, some outsider gave it to you, in this case at the rate of 12%. And component number 4 is that vendor you went to and said, give me raw material or give me services and I'll pay you month, 2 months, 3 months later. On the date of the balance sheet, you owe the vendor 100 crores. Which of these 4 has a cost? Let's go back to the formation of this company. This company wanted money. It went to the owners. It went to outsiders. What did the bankers say? Bankers said, listen, once I lend you the money, I cease to care whether you earn or you don't earn. You are now committed to pay me 12%. If you make losses, you still have to give me 12%. And if you make tons of profit, I'm not interested. I want the same 12%. What did the owner say? Owner said, take my money. No need to make promises. If you don't earn, I'm okay if I get nothing. But to make up for that risk, when you earn, I will take everything, correct? Imagine tomorrow this company doesn't earn. It doesn't make a profit. Tell me, will they have to pay the banker? Do they have to pay the owner? So what does it mean? Cost is something which you have to pay, right? Otherwise it can't be called a cost, isn't it? So owner's money is free. If the direct contribution of the owner is free, then the indirect contribution has to be free. Tell me, when a company declares a dividend, X percentage, is it that X percent of capital or is it capital plus reserves? Of capital. Dividend is a percent of this figure. Interest is a percentage of this figure. Do you pay anything to anybody on this? No. Free. What about loans? Have a cost. How much did you borrow? 400. At what rate? 12%. What does it cost you? And you went to a vendor, give me raw material, I will pay you next month. Promptly next month, you go to the vendor with a check. Does the vendor say, over and above what you owe me, I want interest also? No. Terms were paid next month, you paid next month. Free. How much is the capital of this company? 1,000 crores. How much is the cost? 48. What is the average cost of capital? 4.8%. Why did we work it out? Rule number 1 said, first understand cost of capital. Tomorrow when you meet an investment opportunity, don't accept it unless you can earn a return which is equal to or greater than the cost of capital. If this company tomorrow meets an opportunity where it can earn 4%, should they take it or leave it? And what if they can earn 6%, 8%, 10%? Now should they take it or leave it? And if they do take an opportunity where they can earn 10%, then after paying 4.8% to the banker, are they now in a position to pay dividend to the owner also? Are you all agreeing with me? We have a serious problem. How many of you are not happy when I put a 0 against owner's money? Anyone not happy? वो खड़ा ही हो गया. Those of you who are not happy, now between you and me. Imagine this company has borrowed money from the owners and it has borrowed money from the bankers. At the end of a period, they owe the bankers, for argument's sake, let us say 10 crores. What about the owners? you don't owe them anything. But when you guys said you're not happy, what you probably mean is the owners are also expecting a return. If the banker gave you money expecting interest, the owner is also expecting a return. So guys, if you meet the owner's expectations, let's say it will cost you another 10 crores. How much do you owe the bank? 10. How much are owners hoping to get? 10. If this company wants to satisfy both of them, they must have a minimum bank balance of 20. This company finds in the bank they've got 10. That means they're either in a position to pay the banker or the shareholder. Who will they pay? Why bank? See, once again you are saying bank because bank's money has a cost. Why not pay the owner? No cost. Correct? Why will you pay the bank? Because you made a commitment. What will happen if you don't pay the bank? He will charge you interest. He will charge you interest on interest. And what will happen? You lose credibility. And do you think he'll lend you the next time? Probably not. And when this owner went to the bank, I want a loan, and the banker said, Mr. Owner, condition is you have to pay me come what may. And the owner reluctantly said, all right. But the banker did not take his word for it. Then the banker said, Mr. Owner, you are saying all right, and I know you are going to honor what you are saying, but to be on the safe side, Mr. Banker, do you mind that building of yours if I keep the papers with me? And do you mind every equipment in your building if I hypothecate that also with me? And to be really safe, Mr. Owner, that lovely house of yours, can I keep the papers of that also? And can you request 2-3 friends to give their house papers also? Bankers ask you for security, bankers ask you for collateral. Sometimes they ask the owner to personally guarantee the loan, and at times they go to the extent of saying organize third-party guarantors. In other words, when the banker says, I have to be paid, the banker means I have to be paid, and if you don't pay, he should be in a position to sell off all the assets given as security. And what about the owner? Poor guy owner had said upfront, take my money, if you have, you pay me, if you don't have, you don't, no need to pay me. So when a company finds they owe the bankers 10 crores and the shareholders are hoping to get 10 crores and they have just about 10 crores, chances are they will pay the bankers and default on the shareholder. Ladies and gentlemen, to a large extent, all this is absolute theoretical nonsense. In real life, there are enough examples where faced with a choice of this kind, this company may go ahead and pay the shareholder, even if it means defaulting on the bank. Now, the immediate question to come to your mind is going to be, why? We'll just see that. Why? Why are you committing a foolish act like that? Why are you paying somebody like a shareholder who is completely powerless to do anything if you don't pay him? And you're not only paying the shareholder, but you're paying him at the cost of not paying an entity like a bank. You're committing suicide. Why would you do that? So let's quickly understand what will happen if this company doesn't pay the bank. I said, commitment made, interest on interest, credibility, etc., etc. But when will all that happen? Folks, my assumption is, I'm not talking about a crook. I'm talking about a genuine, honest entrepreneur who's not trying to cheat the bank. In fact, it's a very respectable company. This company has years of relationship with the bank. Tremendous credibility is there. However, there's recession going on. The lack of business. There's a cash crunch. In fact, this company is so professional, they genuinely believe both these are lenders. It is equally important to reward both of them. But due to recession, they found they had just about enough money to reward 1 out of 2 lenders. The only crime committed by them is when they had to choose between these 2 lenders, they seem to have chosen this one and defaulted on this one. Now what will happen? Folks, if my assumptions are correct, genuine company, honest company, respectable company, years of relationship with the bank, and recession going on, and the banker is well aware recession is going on because financial papers, front pages are full of stories about recession every day. Folks, under such circumstances, if such companies do not pay the banker doesn't land up the next day at your doorstep, I want to sell your assets. They would take a somewhat sympathetic approach. What I'm trying to tell you is, if such companies do not pay the bank, maybe for the next month, 2 months, nothing will happen. Then the banker first starts a polite follow-up. A letter arrives, dear borrower, your installments are behind schedule, kindly bring them up to date and oblige. That will be followed by a reminder, followed by one more reminder. Then the tone of letter starts changing. Mr. Borrower, either you clear off your outstandings or, hints start coming, we might have to take legal action against you. Now this borrower realizes things are getting too serious, so he picks up the phone, calls up the banker. He said, Mr. Banker, I've got all your letters, but before you do anything drastic, can I come and meet you for 5 minutes? Takes an appointment, meets the banker, tells the banker, Mr. Banker, if you wish to legally proceed against me, I obviously cannot stop you. That's your prerogative. But he says, Mr. Banker, so many months back I owed you 10 crores. Today I actually owe you 20 crores. Mr. Banker, the truth is, even if you sell off all my assets, we won't be able to recover more than 10 or 11 crores. You will also suffer and I will also suffer. But be that as it may, before you want to make up your mind what action you want to take, I want to present a few facts. He said, number one, Mr. Banker, so many months there was recession, there was no business, I'd run out of cash, that's the reason I've not been able to pay you. But since there was no business, I had lots of free time. He says, in that free time, I have done a detailed study. Where did we go wrong? Annexure number 1 to my application, I have attached my study report, the factors that brought me to my present state of affairs. Number 2, he says, Mr. Banker, I not only had time to find out where we went wrong, I also had time to design a plan of action. How do I get out of this mess? Annexure number 2, I've attached a plan of action. If I do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, if I take these steps, this company can come back on track and start making money again. Now, Mr. Banker, I leave it to you. What option has been given to the banker? Option A. If you wish, you may go ahead and sell all my assets. Out of 20 crores, you'll be able to recover about 10 crores. Option B. Here's my plan of action. Don't take my word for it. Get your experts to verify. And in case the plan of action makes sense, allow me time to implement the plan of action, in which case what will happen? You can recover the entire 20 crores. So option being given to the banker is, Mr. Banker, would you like to recover half your money or would you like to recover all your money? If you wish to recover all your money, allow me time to implement the plan of action. One little problem is, to implement the plan of action, I need another loan of 15 crores. Mr. Banker, if you give me the new loan, I promise you, old loan and new loan will both be paid back. What do you think? Do you think he'll get the loan? Of course he'll get the loan. No, in my case, I gave you assumption, genuine company on India, you don't need all that. But let's imagine, genuine fellow, honest fellow, etc., etc. What am I trying to say, folks? What message am I trying to communicate through this example? If the message you've received from me is, I have just now said, anybody can default against the bank and nothing will happen to him, then I'm sorry, I have communicated wrongly. But what I'm trying to tell you is, when the right person, by right person, I mean genuine, honest person, for the right reasons. By that I mean stuff like recessions and circumstances beyond your control, pandemics, etc. When such people, for such reasons, cannot pay the bank, perhaps the same banker may pump in money and bail this company out of its problems. And why will the banker do that? Because you are eventually dealing with a reasonable lender to whom you can convince why giving me more money is maybe more in your interest than mine. Folks, I'm trying to tell you, this lender is a reasonable lender. This lender is the most unreasonable of all lenders. You don't pay the bank, I'm not guaranteeing it. You may be able to borrow again. But guys, you don't pay this person, I'll write on a stamp paper and give you. In your life, you won't be able to make another public issue of shares. Or I'm asking you once again, does owner's money have a cost? Of course it has a cost. This was your question. It will be naive to think owner's money is free. Tell me, what is the first name that comes to mind in India when you think of capital markets and stock markets? Dhirubhai Ambani, Reliance? I am asking you, do you think Mr. Ambani could have become what he became in his lifetime had he treated shareholders shabbily? 1 year he gives dividend, next year he says, I'm sorry, I don't have the money. Third year he gives dividend, fourth year he says, I'm sorry, I'm not in the mood. Can he do that? He can do that. But then the second public issue would not have come out. But when you do take care of your shareholders the way Dhirubhai Ambani did, what are the benefits that you reap out of it? Same that he reaped, which is what? I think in his entire lifetime, the last thing Mr. Ambani must be considering before starting a project must have been the quantum of money required. Every project coming his way, he must be examining it on its merits, studying the demand-supply situation, looking at the sector prospects, looking at the kind of backward integration benefits it can bring, looking at the kind of competitive advantage it can give him. Last minor details, how many 1,000 crores are required? In the worst of times, if Reliance ever came out with the public issue of shares, is it conceivable his issue will not be subscribed? It will not only be subscribed, it will probably be heavily oversubscribed, even if capital market is down in the dumps. Do you think it would have happened if he didn't take care of his shareholders? Does owner's money have a cost? Of course, it has a cost. Folks, if it has a cost, then how much is the cost? Tell me, how do you measure the cost of loans? Rate of interest. How do you measure the cost of shares? For want of a better yardstick, let's say rate of dividend. What is the most expensive loan that you have come across from the banking sector? Business loan, not personal loan. Not credit card loan for sure. Business loan, term loan. 10, 11, 12, 13, 18 nahi hoga. Working capital. That means working capital. Term loan, 14, 15. Large companies don't even pay that. 11. Tata Motors, 8. Till about 5 years back, L&T had an average cost of borrowing of 4. But let's take on the upper side 14, 15%. Most expensive loan, 14, 15%. Tell me, what is the cheapest share that you have seen from a dividend perspective? Have you noticed? Even B-grade companies, when they declare dividend, they give 30, 40%. I'm now trying to tell you, not only owner's money has a cost, but the cheapest share is perhaps more expensive than the most expensive loan. How much dividend Reliance used to give? I think in the year of inception, they started with 50%. And they went on raising it thereafter. How much dividend Bajaj Auto used to give? I don't remember for how many years Bajaj was consistently giving 100% dividend, and then they went beyond that. L&T a few years back gave a dividend of 14 rupees. The share has a face value of 2 rupees. What's the percentage dividend? 700%. Then they gave a 1:1 bonus. And after a 1:1 bonus, they gave a 10 rupee 50 paisa dividend. A 10 rupee 50 paisa dividend after a 1:1 bonus is equal to a 21 rupee dividend before the bonus. A 21 rupee dividend or 2 rupee share is a 1,050% dividend. Next, then they gave 16 rupees, then they gave one more bonus, and then they gave 18 rupees. Hero Motors shareholders received an interim dividend of 3,500%, 70 rupees on a 2 rupee share. After that, they got a final. I think I've got some statistics here. Yep, look at the maroon numbers only if you want. State Bank of India 360, Larsen & Toubro 855, Infosys 700, Hero Motor 3,250% was final. Prior to that, they gave a 3,500% interim. Does owner's money have a cost? Answer is not only it has a cost, it is the most expensive source of money. So you appreciate this 4.8 will have to be recalculated? For the sake of recalculation against share capital, I am going to put an extremely conservative, let's say 40%. Am I saying owner's money has a cost only when you're a public limited company? What if you're a proprietary concern? Now does owner's money have a cost? Yes, our approach can be different. Why did this owner invest money in this company? If he didn't invest it here, he could have kept it in a bank and earned 4-5%. In bonds, he could have earned 10-12%. In stock market, now the markets are going crazy. But even prior to pandemic, I think mutual funds were giving 20-25%. This fellow could have done that, but he didn't. He let go all those opportunities and put this money here. Do you think he would ever have done it unless he was absolutely confident what I can earn in this business is greater than what I can earn outside? And folks, If he invests outside, when he puts his money in bank, when he puts his money in stocks, who's working? His money is working. He is free. But when he puts money in this business, he not only puts in money, he starts working from morning 8 o'clock to evening 9 o'clock. In the process, invites stresses and ulcers and blood pressures. Does he not deserve 10-15% for his health? I'm saying whichever way you look at it, 20-25% on your money, 10-15% for your health. Unless a business can earn for the owner a minimum return of 40-50%, I don't think the business is worth starting. Now, when I make this kind of a statement in a room full of entrepreneurs like this, that don't even start a business unless you can earn 40-50%. By now, you guys are very polite, by now half a dozen people are on their feet. Anil, how much did you say? Show me a business which can earn 40-50%. Then I need to explain, what do I mean by 50%? You see, normal margins, I could have asked you, but normal margins, is at least the clients where I train, L&T does small projects of L&T, each project. The small ones are worth 2,000, 3,000 crores. The bigger projects are worth 15, 18, 20,000 crores. The average margin made by them is 11%. Aditya Birla, we train globally. I find if you're sitting in Hindalco, those guys' margin might be again 12, 13%. Ultratech has a little higher margin, 17, 18%. So let's say people's margins range from 7, 8% to 17, 18%. And then I get up and say, don't even start a business unless you can earn 50%. The natural reaction of an entrepreneur is, which business gives you that kind of a return? Then I need to explain, what do I mean by 50%? Guys, imagine I get an opportunity to start a trading business. Let's say I want to trade in hardware. I want to buy and sell laptops. Let's say I buy these laptops for 100,000. What is my suggestion? I will never invest in a business unless I can earn 50%. That means when will I put money in this business? Only if I can sell these laptops for a minimum 150,000? But I can't. Hardware is an extremely competitive business. I'll be lucky if I can sell it for maybe 101,000. That competitive. Another question is, does this business deserve my money? Let's imagine I have got 200,000 of my own to invest. So what do? I buy 2 laptops, 100,000 each. I mark them up to 101 and I sell them. When I sell the 2 laptops, I release the money, I buy 2 more. I sell those. I release the money, I buy 2 more. Sell those. Release the money, buy 2 more. End of the year, I find I managed to sell 100 laptops. What did these 100 laptops cost me at the rate of 100,000 each? 10 million or a crore. How much did I sell them for at the rate of 101,000? 1 crore, 1 lakh. How much profit did I make? I made a profit of 100,000. How much did I buy the laptops for? 1 crore. How much profit did I earn? 100,000. What is the percentage profit made by me? Do you think my money should go into this business or should I put it in bank, bond, stock market? Answer is this business. Why? Folks, how much did I invest? And how much did I earn? I have generated a return on investment. When I say 50%, I mean ROI. Those who get up and say, show me a business which earns that, you are wrongly interpreting as profit margin. I'm not talking about profit margin, folks. With a 1% margin, you can have an ROI of 50%. This example is close to my heart because I'm a director in an IT peripheral company. Very large, chances are most gadgets you have been brought into the country by that company. Such thin margin, it's laughable. But the business model is, when the goods land on the shores of India, they're released from customs, they're loaded onto numerous delivery vans, delivered across the country, and money collected. The cycle should finish in 7 days. If it takes 8 days, the company makes a loss. It's that thin a margin. But if you can do it in 7 days, you get 52 cycles in a year. Thin margin, large turnover, 52 cycles in a year translates into a very decent profit. Now tell me, who should be called the finance person in this company? The clerk sitting in the customs office releasing the goods is the finance person. Because if he delays it, that's bad finance management. The truck driver is a finance person. A puncture is bad finance management. We think all finance management happens in account department. Very little finance management happens over there. They are not in the picture when finance management is happening. Unless the entire organization works like a well-oiled machine, your company's finance management cannot be at its best. And each of this person says, I'm a non-finance person. Do you see the paradox? So folks, please understand this 40% is not an exorbitant figure. It's an extremely conservative number. Everyone okay so far? Now tell me, does this have a cost? Please tell me if I overshot the time. I forget when I start talking. Kitna time hai mere paas aur? 15 minutes? 10 minutes? Okay. The most important part is yet to come. Any case. Okay. Does reserves have a cost, folks? Dividend is paid on what? Share capital. Interest is paid on what? Loan. Do you pay anything to anybody on reserves? No. Free? No. How is it not free? But this is also owner's money. Owner took a decision how much money to take home and how much to leave behind. And the logic applied is same. If you take home, you can do the same with it. So here also you should put 40%, but I am being ultra conservative. If not 40, folks, can I put a rock bottom 15%? At least what the owner could have earned by taking it home, utna to milna chahiye. CAs in the room would probably start an argument with me, Anil, how can you distinguish between the two? If you put 40 here, you should put 40 there, and they'll be absolutely right if they do that. But like I said, I want to make the number palatable for you, so I'm keeping it on the lower side. So first item has a cost, second item has a cost, third, of course, it has a cost. That only leaves your vendor. You went to the vendor, give me raw material, I will pay you next month. Next month when you go with a check, does the vendor say, I need interest also? No. Can I say this is free? No. How is it not free if you don't have to pay interest? Folks, if you go to the vendor on the due date with the check, the vendor will not ask you for interest, but you go to the same vendor to whom you owe money next month and say, I'll give it to you today. Will you give me a discount? I think the junior most officer in the vendor's organization will probably be empowered to say, if you're going to give me money before time, I'll be very happy to extend to you a cash discount, a CD is what they call, at the rate of, I think 2% per month is industry standard in India. 2% per month translates into 24% per annum. How can a vendor afford to give you a discount at an effective rate of 24% per annum just because you're paying money before time? And the answer is the vendor can afford to do that because that is the kind of interest the vendor has already built into the quotation the day he quoted to you on a 30, 60, 90 days. Folks, 2% per month is equal to 24% per annum. I'm taking a conservative approach. If not 2, can I at least take 1.5% per month, 18% per annum? Are we now in a position to work out the weighted average cost of capital? Pehle kitna nikala tha? 4.8%. Folks, this company has borrowed 300 at 40%, 200 at 15%, 400 at 12%, and 100 at 18%. How much does money cost this company? Or, what does rule number 1 say? First, understand cost of capital. And when you meet an investment opportunity, don't accept it unless you can earn equal to or greater than. Why do I say equal to again and again? Folks, if the money costs this company 21.6 and if the assets earn 21.6% is good enough. Why is it good enough? Covers everything. Have you noticed how did we work out 21.6%? Everybody's expectations are covered, including 40% to the owner. So if this company earns 21.6%, every employee of this company will get salary, every vendor will get paid, landlord will get rent, the banker to this company will earn 12%, and the owner of this company will earn 40%. What if this company makes a profit, but less than 21.6? But please understand, folks, 21.6% is meaningless. If your capital is 1,000 crores, then the profit of this company in absolute amount should be 216 crores, which means 21.6%. What if this company makes a profit, but 100 crores? I started this session asking you, what business is Tata Motors in? What business is Hilton in? I said, business of every business is to make profit. By implication, I was saying, guys, I am not interested in your company's impressive vision statement, mission statement. Tell me, is the bottom line plus or minus? If the bottom line is minus, you're a failure. But now this company has a bottom line which is plus 100 crores. By that definition, I should call them a success. Now I'm saying 100 crores.
What do you say about Zomato?
वो तो आजकल न्यू, आई एम ओल्ड इकोनॉमी पर्सन, आई डोंट अंडरस्टैंड द न्यू इकोनॉमी कंपनीज. वो वैल्यूअर का वैल्यूएशन है. And those guys will still get out with a profit. The gullible guys will be left holding the baby, but that will another lecture के like है वो. कहाँ था मैं? I said if this company makes a profit of 100 crores, by my earlier logic I should call it a success. Now I'm saying 100 crore not enough. Profit should be 216 crores. What does a 100 crore profit mean? Oh, it's a profit-making company. Therefore, every employee must have got salary. Every vendor must have been paid. Landlord must have got rent. Even the banker got 12%. But who did not get money? Owner. But folks, businesses started with one objective. And that is to make profit. For whom? For the owner. Owner can be a single shareholder. मेरे को 5 मिनट दे दो, खत्म करके फिर भी start. Owner can be a single owner. Owner can be 40 lakh owners as in the case of Reliance. Businesses started with one objective, make profit for the owner. Everybody is making money out of this company except the owner. Is it a sustainable proposition? Guys, once in a while, if the owner doesn't get his desired rate of return, it's okay. The owner is a risk taker. But imagine year after year after year, the owners are taking home 5, 6, 7, 8%. Is it difficult to visualize owners of this company calling a little meeting, having a little roundtable conference, that why did we start the business? Did we start this business so that we can generate employment in the country? Did we start this business so that vendors can make money and bankers can make money? Or did we start the business that we can make money? Except for us, everybody is making money. Guys, it's a matter of time before the owners will say, I don't think we should continue this business. Let's shut it down. And then nobody will make money. I am saying in every organization, the topmost person to the person on the bottommost rung has to understand, let us collectively get together and function in such a way that this person gets his desired rate of return. And please understand, this person is the last person who takes money home. If this person gets his desired rate of return, it means along the value chain, everyone has got their desired rates of return, and that is a sustainable win-win-win-win situation. When will that happen in this company? When they earn a minimum return of 21.6%. What if they earn greater than 21.6%? That's a different story. Employee will get the same salary, landlord will get the same rent, banker will get the same interest, but the owner said, I want 40%. Owner will now be taking home 50, 60, 70. That is success. My benchmark of success is to have outperformed the owner's expectation. Now, folks, before we wind up, I have 2 pieces of bad news, such that some of you may not sleep tonight. I'm sorry to end on a bad news, but I have no choice. Bad news number 1. How much does the money cost this company? Left-hand side cost them how much? 21.6. How much does the right-hand side earn for them? Minimum? 21.6. Folks, left-hand side costs, entire left-hand side costs, but the entire right-hand side does not earn. Why does it not earn? Guys, homework number 1, work out your cost of capital. Homework number 2, make a list of all your assets. What assets do you have? If you're in manufacturing, you'll have real estate, buildings, machines, equipments. You'll have inventory in your warehouse. You'll have debtors. You'll have bank balances. You'll have vehicles. If you're a large company, you might have some earmarked recreation area for employees, parking area for employees, cafeterias. Make a list of your assets, guys. You will discover against every asset, you will be able to write either the letters PA or the letters NPA. We hear this in the term of banks. I'm talking about in your company terms now. Performing assets or non-performing assets. What does a performing asset mean? What does a non-performing asset mean? If you own a car and the car runs beautifully, is it a performing asset or a non-performing asset? Your car is a non-performing asset. The taxi owner's car is a performing asset. So by non-performing, I don't mean it doesn't perform the function it is supposed to perform. Some assets earn for you, other assets don't earn for you. My observation is, if you are an extremely lucky organization, chances are your breakup between performing and non-performing can be 50-50, if you're lucky. If not, the NPA can be even higher. How does it alter your equation? How much does the left-hand side cost you? 21.6. How much should the right-hand side earn for you minimum? 21.6. And now to your horror, you discover half the right-hand side doesn't earn. How much should the other half earn for you? Oops, oops, oops. Target has doubled. Second piece of bad news. Even performing assets don't perform throughout the year. If you work 6-day weeks, 52 days your performing assets are not performing. God forbid if you have a 5-day week, 104 days they don't perform. And then manufacturing companies can have breakdowns and you have maintenance shutdowns. Diwali around the corner. Kitne din chutti hai? Diwali. India is a land of festivals. No dearth of more holiday. Then there are sick leaves. Then there are annual leaves. Somebody has worked out the best organization in the world performs not more than 2/3 of the year. But guys, do you appreciate liabilities don't take holidays? No banker says, Sunday kaam nahi karte, no need to pay me interest. No, sir. Interest meter is on. You are supposed to earn 43.2%, but over 2/3 of the year, your effective, targeted, annualized rate of return becomes something like, guys, if you're understanding what I'm saying, shayad neend nahi aayegi aaj. Please try and understand what I'm attempting to communicate to you. I am trying to tell you, as an organization, you do not own a single asset. You don't have a single piece of equipment. You don't have a single machinery. You don't have a single laptop. You don't even have a table or a chair. You have no asset that doesn't have a corresponding liability. You have no liability that doesn't have a cost. And if your sources are costing you effectively 65%, then the pain has to be felt here if you discover 1 rupee on the right-hand side, which is idle for 1 day more than necessary. To idle kya kar raha hai yaar? Meter is on at 65, go and earn 65. Because if you don't earn 65 today, your neighbor will have to earn 130, 65 for you and 65 for itself. Do you now understand what a crime gets committed? सुबह हम बात कर रहे थे when a manufacturing company holds on to something known as non-moving inventory. अरे what do you mean non-moving? Move, damn it. The meter is on at 65, get that 65. What a crime gets committed when a sales fellow negotiating with the customer agrees to give him a 90-day credit when with a little bit of negotiation he could have beaten him down to 60 or 30 days. That extra credit given is non-performing. Now tell me, does that mantra of mine make a little more sense when I told you less is bad? More is worse. Guys, now I've given a name to the more. More of anything is non-performing. And what does non-performing mean? Non-performing means that asset doesn't earn. But that asset is represented by a liability which is costing you. If that one doesn't earn, somebody will have to earn twice as hard. Imagine, you loot a bank. Karna mat, imagine. Bring the money in a sack. Dump it in a cupboard, lock करके बैठ जाओ. Can you afford it? Yes, लूटा हुआ पैसा. But now imagine, लूटा नहीं था. Imagine you borrowed it at 65%. Now bring that money and keep it in a cupboard and sit down. कितना hurt करेगा? अरे, that meter is on 65, ये पैसा cupboard में पड़ा है. Folks, if that hurts, why doesn't any asset that doesn't earn hurt you as much? If that hurts, why doesn't excess inventory hurt you as much? If that hurts, why doesn't unutilized capacity hurt you as much? If that hurts, why doesn't money in the bank hurt you as much? If you're sitting on a lot of bank balance, is it something to be happy about or is it something to make you lose your sleep? Guys, current account doesn't even earn you interest. And if you remember, that money has come from here and whatever's come from here is costing you 65. How can it be sitting in a bank? It should be out earning for you. Now, whether you realize it or not, I have just now given you 3 super secrets of increasing profit with existing turnover. Non-finance people think profit बढ़ाना है तो sale बढ़ानी पड़ेगी. Of course you should do that. But can you increase profit with existing turnovers? I've given you 3 super secrets just now. Guys, profit depends upon, number 1, cost of capital. Have you noticed? Some sources of money are more expensive than others. if your capital composition was made up of a relatively higher proportion of cheap money and a smaller proportion of expensive money, maybe this 21.6 could have been 16%. Optimize cost of capital. Number two, what appears on the right hand side? All these things. किसने create किए ये items? Whose actions created these assets? Who created inventory? Your purchase manager? Whose actions brought debtors? Your sales manager? Who decided which machine to buy and what size and what cost? Production guys? Are you noticing? हर एक अपने आप को non-finance बोलता है. If everybody in your organization was financially literate, if everybody in your organization understood the concept of cost of capital, if everybody in your organization understood the crime of possessing a non-performing asset, and while creating these assets, had they exercised financial prudence, and thereby you had a relatively higher percentage of performing as compared to non-performing assets. So number two, improve the proportion between performing. Guys, even if you do one exercise after I have gone from here, start the process of identification of non-performing assets in your company. Please understand, non-performing का ये मतलब नहीं कि non-essential. So your non-performing can be further broken up into essential and non-essential non-performing assets. अभी आज time नहीं है to elaborate what essential means and what non-essential means. The biggest crime is to own non-essential non-performing assets. Even if you start the exercise from tomorrow of identification of non-essential, non-performing assets, start getting rid of them, release the money blocked in them, bring the money back into circulation, that single act will take your profit moving upwards. बताइए, in a bar, happy hours क्या होता है? It is an attempt to convert the non-performing hours into performing hours. I am saying identify happy hour opportunities within your company. And number three, can you improve the proportion of, मैंने पूछा, do you work 6-day week or 5-day week? Why not 7-day week? लोगों को छुट्टी चाहिए ना? Give it to them turn by turn. Do airlines shut down? Do hotels shut down? Why do your company shut down? I know friends of mine setting up a new plant. What happened to your old plant? I reached full capacity. How many shifts do you work? 1 shift. तो कैसे होगी full capacity? Sweat your assets more. Guys, do these three things. Optimize cost of capital. Improve the proportion of performing and non-performing. See that the performing assets perform as long a duration in the year as possible. I will guarantee you, with existing turnovers, not only profits will improve, maybe it can double. And now, with a perfect balance sheet at your disposal, now you try and increase turnovers, dramatic changes will happen to the bottom line. I'm sorry, I rushed through. What should have needed twice the time, I tried to compress it within the time given. Phir bhi, I think I'm guilty of exceeding my time limit. But I thought, let me leave you with some solid value addition before I go from here. So my apologies for the delay. Thank you so much. Pleasure, as always, coming over here, talking to all of you. Thanks a lot.
Thanks a lot, Dr. Lamba. While many of us already knew that we are in the business of making profit, but there are a lot of new things that we learned today, especially the 2 golden rules. That was, I think, a very good learning for all of us. Thanks for giving us a mantra of that less is bad, but more is even worst. And I think a lot of us will go tonight and maybe tomorrow, not tonight because we have a party to follow, but tomorrow we'll introspect where the real finance management is happening in our companies. So thanks a lot for a wonderful session. It was very enlightening for all of us. Now I would like to invite Trevor Fernandez from IIFL to present a memento to Dr. Lamba. Thanks a lot, everyone, for turning out in good numbers and making this event such a successful event. And Gayatri for being the entertainer for the event. Your comments from the front row were really interesting. And I would like to invite everyone for drinks and dinner with some live music to Diamante. So let the party continue. And we'll think about all those sleepless night things from tomorrow, not tonight. Thank you. Thanks a lot, everyone. Thanks. Just before we proceed to Diamante, I would like to invite everyone here for a group photo. Thank you.